It's October 30th, 1966. Somewhere between 4:30 and 5 p.m., an 18-year-old student at Riverside City College, Cherry Jo Bates, leaves her house and heads to the campus library. Shortly after, her father, Joseph Bates, had returned home to find a note taped to the family refrigerator reading, "Dad, went to RCC library." At 9 p.m., when the library closed for the night, Bates is on her way home, not suspecting that this will be her last trip, ever. Next morning at 5:43 a.m., the worried father decided to call the police and file a missing person report. 1 hour later, the police were alerted of a dead woman's body near the Riverside City College by a groundskeeper named Spotlesz Martin. When the police arrived, the victim was found face down on a gravel path between two unoccupied houses on Terracina Drive. The victim was dressed in a long-sleeve pale yellow print blouse and faded red capri pants, with her identification and 56 cents found near the body, confirming that the victim was indeed Cherry Jo Bates. She had been brutally murdered, suffering 2 stab wounds in her chest. Her left cheek, upper lip, hands, and arms had also been cut, with 3 slash wounds to her throat having severed her jugular vein and larynx. 10 feet from the mutilating crime scene, investigators found a cheap paint-spattered wristwatch along with a footprint of a shoe sold solely in military outlets. The shoe was between 8 and 10 inches. A subsequent report given to the Riverside investigators by an eyewitness indicated that Bates drove her Volkswagen Beetle in the direction of RCC at approximately 6:10 p.m. The eyewitness also claimed that her vehicle was closely followed by a bronze 1965 or 1966 model Oldsmobile. Another witness statement would claim that a young man whose age she estimated to be either 19 or 20, and approximately 5 feet 11 inches or 180 centimeters in height, had been lurking in shadows across the street from Bates's vehicle and had been staring in the direction of her car around the same time the library closed. Almost a month later, both Riverside Police Department and Riverside Press Enterprise received almost identical letters titled The Confession. The author claimed responsibility for the Bates murder, providing details of the crime that were not released to the public, reading, "I said it was about time. She asked me about time for what? I said it was about time for her to die. I grabbed her around the neck with my hand over her mouth." In December of 1966, a macabre poem was discovered by a janitor carved into the bottom side of a desktop in the RCC library, titled "Sick of Living / Unwilling to Die." It was signed with what were assumed to be a set of lowercase initials, RH, inscribed below. Yet the authenticity of that poem remains uncertain to this day. However, no one could have foreseen that within half a decade, this enigmatic murderer would ascend to infamy as one of the most notorious and feared serial killers in history. On December 20th, 1968, 8 p.m., the 17-year-old David Arthur Faraday is driving his mother's car going to pick up the 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen so they can go on their first date. The two sweethearts then make a quick stop to a friend of theirs around 10 p.m., and then they head to Lake Herman Road, more specifically a spot known as Lover's Lane. At around 11:05 and 11:10 p.m., the stranger's car pulls up at about 10 feet away from Faraday's car. The stranger leaves his car and proceeds to fire several shots at the couple's car. Terrified, the couple tried to leave the car, however, only one succeeded. As Faraday was leaving, the assailant shot him in the head with a .22 caliber rifle. The terrified 16-year-old Jensen desperately tried to flee the gruesome scene, only to be struck by 5 shots in her back. The killer then flees the crime scene with his car. Only a couple minutes later, a woman was driving down the road when she spotted the horrifying act that had just happened. Scared, she then drove past it to find a police patrol to report what she had just seen. When the police arrived, Jensen was pronounced dead. However, there was hope for Faraday as he was still breathing. Unfortunately, not for long. Rushed to the hospital, he was then found dead at 12:05 a.m. by Dr. Siebert. Back at the crime scene, the police couldn't find much. There were no usable foot or tire prints. Nonetheless, they found 10 bullet casings. 5 of them hit Jensen, 1 hit Faraday, 2 hit the car, and the last 2 were unaccounted for. However, it's assumed that these bullets were shot first as a warning, while the killer was walking towards the couple. With little to no evidence on the crime scene, the police didn't have much to work with. However, there are a couple of witnesses that could provide some crucial information for identifying the madman behind these horrifying murders. James Owen was a retired Air Force enlisted man. He was working as a supervisor at an oil company. While on his way to work at approximately 11:14 p.m., he claimed that he saw the victim's car with another car parked next to it, on the east side of the turnout. He also said, quote, "When I was approximately 1/4 of a mile beyond, I think I heard a shot." As well as, "Just before approaching the scene, a vehicle passed me going in the opposite direction towards Vallejo." Was the killer ducking to avoid being observed, or was he not in the car? The answer to this question will unfortunately never be known. At around 9:30 p.m., William Crow and his girlfriend were parked at the same spot as Faraday and Jensen when suddenly a passing-by blue car, possibly a Valiant, braked hard and turned around. Sensing something was wrong, Crow fled the area immediately. However, the blue car followed them. According to the police report, Crow said, "I sped up. The car behind me also sped up. At one point I was looking over my shoulder. The car behind me came up on my side, with its right front fender near the driver's rear quarter panel, and appeared to be moving towards, making contact." Also claiming, "I did not see the car again. I could not see the passenger seat, but the driver was a man with short hair and glasses. I did not see his specific facial features." From Crow's statements, it was obvious that the assailant had already been planning on murdering someone that night. Unfortunately, the victims were the young Faraday and Jensen. It's somewhere around midnight, between July 4th and 5th, 1969. Darlene Farron, a well-known 24-year-old waitress at a local restaurant, and Michael Majot, a 19-year-old student, are going on their first date. Despite Darlene being married to Dean Farron, they park the car 70 feet from the entrance at the Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, California, only 2 miles away from the Lake Herman Road, as this was another famous place for couples at the time. Shortly after another vehicle pulls up, the unknown male driver turned the headlights off and sat motionless, spying on them. Worried, Majot asked if she knew who this person was, to which Farron vaguely replied, "Don't worry about it." 3 minutes passed and the driver left the parking lot. Now calmed, Majot and Farron continued their date. Unfortunately not for long, as approximately 5 minutes later the same driver returned and parked a few feet next to Farron's vehicle. He exited his car and started walking towards them. He then shone a flashlight into the car. With the couple assuming it was a police officer, they rolled down their windows. Yet they couldn't have been more wrong. Emotionless, the suspicious driver then proceeds to fire his 9mm pistol into the car, hitting Majot in the right arm and Farron in the neck, causing her to slump towards the steering wheel. Scared to death and wounded, Majot tried to leave the car, but unfortunately for him, the door handle was, according to the police reports, missing or removed. With the assailant slowly moving away from the victim's car, he heard the desperate attempts of Majot to open the door. He quickly goes to him and shoots each of the victims 2 times, then he rushes to his car and drives off. However, a witness claims that he heard the shots, estimating them to be at 12:10 a.m. Approximately 7 minutes later, 3 teenagers drove into the parking lot, seeing the horrifying act that had just happened. The police arrived at the scene around 12:20 a.m., with both victims taken to the hospital. Only one survived. Farron was pronounced dead at 12:40 a.m., with her autopsy reading, "Cause of death, multiple bullet wounds to the chest and abdominal organs." However, unfortunately for the madman killer, Majot was still breathing, describing him as short, possible 5'8", possibly 195 to 200 pounds, or maybe even larger. Short curly hair, light brown, almost blonde, with a large face. He was wearing dark clothes and did not have glasses. With this being a step in the right direction to finding the killer, The details about the killer was still not enough for them to develop a suspect. Just after the hospital pronounced Farron dead, the Vallejo Police Department dispatched Nancy Slover, received a phone call from a nearby public telephone.
Vallejo Police Department?
I want to report a double murder.
Yeah,
Go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, Public Park. You'll find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye.
With this cold and daunting call, the police rushed to the payphone only to find it empty and in a perfect condition. This being another dead end, speculations began to rise as to if Farron indeed knew her murderer. According to Robert Graysmith, a cartoonist at the time, immediately after Farron and Majot left the house, they started believing or noticed that they were being followed by a man in a light-colored car. For some reason, Darlene started driving out of town in the direction of Lake Herman Road. Shortly before midnight, she turned her car into an empty parking lot of Blue Rock Springs Park. Yet this being only speculations and merely a theory with no actual connection, it doesn't make much sense for her to drive into a deserted parking lot instead of getting help. There is also suspicion as to why, if they were being followed into the lot, Farron did not drive out of it once the unknown driver initially left. Graysmith suggests that Farron telling Majot not to worry about the driver, and the couple assuming he was a police officer, are more likely to happen if they arrived on their own accord. On August 1st, 1969, Vallejo Times-Herald, San Francisco Chronicle, and San Francisco Examiner received 3 nearly identical handwritten letters, later described by a psychiatrist as written by someone you would expect to be brooding and isolated. The author took credit for the shootings at Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs, saying, "Dear editor, this is the murder of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman and the girl on the 4th of July. To prove I killed them, I shall state some facts which only I and the police know." It's important to know that throughout the letter he makes a spelling mistake, spelling Christmas with 2 S, a spelling mistake which will later be a crucial detail that will confirm the author was indeed the madman behind these disgusting acts. He wrote, 1. Brand name of ammo Super X2, 10 shots fired. He later also gave details about the homicide at Blue Rock Springs, saying, 2. Boy was also shot in knee. 3. Ammo was made by Western. Each letter also included a third of a 408-symbol cryptogram which the author claimed would reveal his identity. The killer demanded that the ciphers be printed on each paper's front page, or else, quote, "If you do not print this cipher by afternoon of Fry, 1st August 69, I will go on a kill rampage. I will cruise around all weekend killing lone people in the night." The Chronicle published its third of the cryptogram on page 4 of the next day's edition. An article printed alongside the code quoted Vallejo police officer Chief Jack E. Stiltz as saying, "We're not satisfied that the letter was written by the murderer," and requested the writer send a second letter with more facts to prove his identity. 3 days later, on August 4th, the Examiner received a letter reading, "Dear editor, this is the Zodiac speaking." This was the first time the killer had used this name for identification. He also wrote in the letter, "I shall be very happy to supply with war materials," followed by the way, are the police having a good time with the code? If not, tell them to cheer up. When they do crack it, they will have me." Only 1 day later, on August 5th, the 408-symbol cipher was successfully decoded not by the FBI or the CIA, but by Donald and Betty Harden, a couple in Salinas. They successfully decoded the whole cipher without the last 18 symbols, the content of which still remains a secret to this day. Containing some spelling mistakes, the Zodiac wrote, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." Also saying, "Because man is the most dangerous animal of all," referring to The Most Dangerous Game, a 1924 short story by Richard Connell. He then finishes the letter saying why he commits the killings. Quote, "The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all the I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or atop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife." With this claim, it became obvious that the police was dealing with a lot more than a regular psychopath on a rampage, but a mastermind with an insatiable thirst for murder. On the afternoon of September 27, 1969, college students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were enjoying a relaxing visit along the shore of Lake Berryessa. Soon, Cecilia noted a man acting strangely, hiding behind some nearby trees and watching them. A few minutes later, the man reappeared, now wearing a black executioner's hood with a waistline bib decorated with a crossed circle, and a pair of clip-on sunglasses. Approaching the couple and pointing a gun at them, Cecilia alerted Brian with the words, "Oh my God, he's got a gun." The man claimed to be an escaped convict, stating that he had killed a guard before stealing a car. He demanded their money and car so he can go to Mexico. After the couple complied, the assailant handed Cecilia a pre-cut plastic clothesline and instructed her to tie Brian up, before doing the same to her. Just as they hoped the ordeal would end as a mere inconvenience, the hooded stranger suddenly attacked, brutally stabbing them with a knife. Hartnell suffered 6 wounds and Shepard 10 in the process. The attacker then simply walked away, leaving the couple in agony. However, their screams were heard by a man and his son who were fishing nearby. They quickly found the victims and called for help. Napa County deputies Dave Collin and Ray Land were the first to arrive at the gruesome scene. Noticing that Cecilia was still conscious, they immediately requested an ambulance. Before losing consciousness, Cecilia told Collins that her assailant was just maybe a little taller than you, maybe an inch. Deputy Collins was 5 feet 10 inches tall. An ambulance arrived around 7:55 p.m., taking both victims to a Napa hospital at 8:50 p.m. Sadly, Cecilia lapsed into a coma during transport and never regained consciousness, passing away 2 days later. Unfortunately for the Zodiac, Hartnell survived and recounted his tale to the police. Back at the crime scene, Deputy Dave Collins followed the footsteps found at the crime scene, leading him to Brian's car, a Carmen Ghia. Later saying, "I looked at the Carmen Ghia, and on the passenger door, the circle with the vertical and horizontal line through it was displayed, along with several dates, ending with September 27, 1969, 6:30 p.m., by knife, which was our crime." He later recalled, "He had left his calling card, just as he had done before. I recognized the symbol on the door as the same one she had described on the hood." After the attack, the killer drove to a phone booth at 1231 Main Street, 27 miles away in downtown Napa, and placed a call around 7:40 p.m. to the Napa County Sheriff's Department.
Napa Police Department. I want to report a murder. No, a double murder. They're 2 miles north of party headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. I'm the one that did it.
Alerted to the call, the police rushed to the payphone, only to find it off the hook just minutes later. Detectives lifted a still wet palm print from the phone, but were never able to match it to any suspect. A few days later, the autopsy report on Cecilia revealed that the wounds were inflicted by a weapon likely between 9 to 11 inches in length, about an inch wide and possibly sharpened on both sides, similar to a bayonet. Earlier that same day, 3 women from Pacific Union College had parked their vehicle 2 miles north of the A&W root beer stand on Knoxville Road around 3:30 p.m. As they exited their car to go sunbathing, a white male in a silver or light blue Chevrolet 2-door sedan with California plates pulled up and parked bumper to bumper behind them. He remained in his vehicle for about 30 minutes before the women noticed him again, this time observing them from about 40 to 50 feet away. His avoidance of eye contact raised their suspicions. The man was described as being between 28 and 40 years old, weighing 200 to 225 pounds, and standing about 6 feet tall with styled black hair, rounded eyes, thin lips, and a muscular or stocky build. He was dressed in dark pants and a dark pullover shirt. When the women decided to leave around 4:30 p.m., they noticed his car was gone. One of the women recalled seeing what appeared to be a white belt around his back or possibly a t-shirt hanging out, while another mentioned a black short-sleeved sweater shirt, bunched up at the front with a white t-shirt hanging out the back. Brian Hartnell later estimated the attacker to be 20 to 30 years old based on his voice, with dark brown hair visible through the hood. He described the man as wearing dark blue or black pleated slacks, standing between 5'8" and 6 foot tall, and weighing about 225 to 250 pounds. Hartnell also noticed a knife in a case on the right side of the attacker's belt, near the front of his trousers, and a cut-up rope in his rear pocket, resembling the white plastic clothesline. Could the white belt or white t-shirt hanging out, observed by the two girls earlier, have been the cut length of the plastic clothesline, suggesting the man had been preparing for an attack? Did he lose his nerve, change his mind, and instead target Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard approximately 2 hours later? Unfortunately, the answers to these questions remain unknown to this day. Only 2 weeks later, on 11th of October 1969, a man requisitioned the 1968 Ford Galaxy 500 taxicab of the 29-year-old Paul Stein, close to the corner of Mason and Geary Streets in downtown San Francisco. Although it is equally conceivable the taxicab was summoned between 9:35 p.m. and 9:45 p.m. close to the Westin St. Francis Hotel at 335 Powell Street, situated in Union Square in the bustling theater district of San Francisco. Regardless of the origin point, this would turn out to be the taxicab driver's final journey, because the passenger he had just picked up was the Zodiac Killer, already responsible for 4 murders and 2 attempted murders during his previous 10 months of terror. Unaware of the dangerous individual that had just entered his taxicab, Paul Stein was to lose his life at the intersection of Washington and Cherry in the wealthy neighborhood of Presidio Heights, approximately 12 minutes later. Upon arrival, the passenger asked to be driven 1 block down to Washington and Cherry Streets. The reason for the request remains unknown. Perhaps the Zodiac saw someone close by, or wanted to drive to the next block's corner, which was darker and obscured by a large tree. At approximately 9:55 p.m., the Zodiac shot Stein in the head with a handgun, likely killing Stein immediately. From a house on the opposite side of the street, 3 teenage eyewitnesses saw the unfolding events of that night as the killer removed a rear section of the victim's shirt, as well as wiping down various parts of the taxicab interior, including the driver's side compartment. Upon leaving the vehicle, he was further observed wiping down the exterior right front passenger door and driver's side door handles. Soon after, at around 9:58 p.m., the teenagers rang the police, but unfortunately crossed wires or misinterpretation by the police dispatcher regarding the specifics of the crime meant that the dispatcher had mistakenly informed patrolmen to be on the lookout for a black male adult, ultimately allowing the murder of Paul Stein to escape the clutches of law enforcement as he ambled down Jackson Street, 1 block from the crime scene. Unknown at the time, this was to become the best and ultimately last chance of ever capturing the elusive Zodiac Killer. From their vantage point of 50 to 60 feet away, the 3 teenagers described the suspect to the police dispatcher as probably in his early 40s, 5'8", heavy build, reddish blonde crew-cut hair, wearing eyeglasses, dark brown trousers, dark navy blue or black parka jacket, dark shoes. But the false description unfortunately gave the Zodiac Killer a lucky break, from which he took full advantage. According to eyewitnesses, the Zodiac Killer, after exiting the taxicab, walked unhurried to Cherry Street, headed north to Jackson Street before turning right and heading east towards the Jackson and Maple Street intersection. 2 police officers on duty that night, Donald Falk and Eric Zelms, had been patrolling the eastern Richmond district, traveling northbound on Presidio Avenue just past Washington Street, when they received a radio broadcast of what was thought at the time to be an assault and robbery on a taxicab driver near the Washington and Cherry intersection. The 2 officers proceeded on towards Jackson Street, turned west, and were just approaching the intersection of Jackson and Maple when Donald Falk noticed a white male sporting a crew cut, wearing a 3/4 length navy blue jacket, an elastic waist, rust-colored or brown-pleated trousers, and a tan engineering-style footwear. When the officer's patrol car pulled up alongside the man, they asked him if he had seen anything suspicious. He responded that he had seen a man waving a gun earlier and went east down Washington. They drove quickly away, believing that a black man was the culprit. Officer Armand Pellicetti and his partner Frank Peda, also on duty that night, were first to arrive. The 2 officers were extremely close by and parked on the intersection of Washington and Cherry, Armand Pellicetti exited his vehicle and noticed 3 teenagers in the vicinity of the crime scene, so he ushered the children back across the street to the alcove of their residence. At this point, he was of the understanding he was looking for a black male adult suspect. He went over to the taxicab and observed Paul Stein lying slumped over the front passenger seat with his head resting on the floorboard of the passenger side, and was 99.9% certain he was dead. It is then he retook the description of the suspect. In the 2007 This Is the Zodiac Speaking documentary, he stated, "It was then I was told it was a white male. I couldn't get to the radio fast enough at that point to let everybody else know." 2 days later, the Chronicle received a new letter from the Zodiac, claiming credit for the murder of the taxi driver, providing a torn section of Stein's bloody shirt as proof. He also says, "The San Francisco could have caught me last night." The 2 police officers who initially responded realized that they had been face-to-face with the Zodiac. At the end of the letter included a threat about killing school children on a school bus, saying, "School children make nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus tomorrow some morning." With that threat, the Bay Area police departments immediately began escorting school buses. Only a few days later, Falcon Zelms, together with 3 teenage eyewitnesses, successfully created a composite sketch of the man. It was at that time the San Francisco Police Department detectives Bill Armstrong and Dave Toshi were assigned to the case. 11 days after the murder of Paul Stein, at 2 a.m. on October 22, 1969, someone claiming to be the Zodiac called the Oakland Police Department, demanding that one of the 2 prominent lawyers, F. Lee Bailey or Melvin Belly, appear that morning on AM San Francisco, a talk show on KGO-TV hosted by Jim Dunbar. Bailey was not available, but Belly agreed to appear. Dunbar appealed to the viewers to keep the lines open. Someone claiming to be the Zodiac called several times, and Belly asked the caller for a less ominous name, and the caller picked Sam. The caller said he would not reveal his true identity, as he was afraid of being sent to the gas chamber, then California's capital punishment method. Belly arranged a rendezvous to meet the caller outside a shop on Mission Street in Daly City, but no one arrived. The call was later traced back to a mental patient named Eric Weil, who investigators concluded was not the Zodiac. A couple weeks later, on November 8th, the Zodiac mailed yet another cipher consisting of 340 characters. This cipher got sold recently, on December 5th of 2020, by an international team of private citizens. The translation has been confirmed by the FBI. In the cipher, the Zodiac declines being Sam, who called the AM San Francisco, saying that he was not afraid of the gas chamber. In fact, quite the opposite. He said, "Because it will send me to paradise all the sooner." On October 27, 1970, the Chronicle reporter Paul Avery received a Halloween card signed with the letter Z and the Zodiac Killer's crossed circle symbol. Handwritten inside the card was a note. "Peekaboo, you are doomed. From your secret pal." The threat was taken seriously and was the subject of a front-page story in the Chronicle. The phrase 14 in the letter was interpreted as a possible reference to a 14th victim. However, this is debatable to this day. From that day, Avery was allowed a pistol, while Chronicle reporters jokingly started wearing buttons saying, "I am not Avery." Soon after receiving the letter, Avery received an anonymous letter alerting him to the similarities between the Zodiac's activities and the unsolved Bates murder in Riverside. Interestingly, this is the first time the Zodiac has spoken specifically to one person. A couple of months pass by, and another letter arrives at the Los Angeles Times on March 13th, 1971. The Zodiac criticized that the police were unable to catch him, saying, "They had best get off their fat asses plus do something, because the longer they fiddle plus fuck around, the more slaves I will collect for my afterlife." While congratulating them for linking the Bates murder to him, however, this is debatable. Some believe that he is simply claiming credit for murders he did not commit, while others are accepting his words as point-blank truth. However, we can't know for sure. After a couple days, another letter was received by the Zodiac, allegedly claiming responsibility for the disappearance of Donna Ann Lass at Lake Tahoe. However, the authenticity of the claims in the letter are merely a speculation. After the Lake Tahoe letter, many letters were sent in the following years. However, the authenticity of them is discredited due to the mismatching handwriting. These letters were perhaps sent by members of the public interested in the case and wanting to impersonate him. With the number of Zodiac's murders never confirmed, it is accepted that the Zodiac's killing stopped after Paul Stein. True or not, we cannot know for sure. To this day, the story of the Zodiac Killer remains one of the most perplexing mysteries in criminal history. We've seen how the Zodiac wielded terror with a chilling sense of purpose. But, beyond the fear he's instilled, it's crucial to examine the role that evidence, or the lack thereof, played in this enduring enigma. The Zodiac Killer operated in a time when forensic science was in its infancy. DNA profiling was unheard of, and the tools available to investigators were limited. Despite these challenges, the police did their best to navigate the maze of cryptic clues, witness accounts, and physical evidence left behind. Yet, the Zodiac was always one step ahead, seemingly aware of these limitations and exploiting them at every turn. The physical evidence recovered from the crime scenes was often scant or inconclusive. For instance, at the Lake Herman Road murders, there were shell casings but no fingerprints or usable biological evidence. The same could be said for Blue Rock Springs, where bullet fragments and a few vague witness descriptions were all the police had to go on. At Lake Berryessa, the Zodiac's costume left a powerful psychological imprint, but the only physical trace he left behind was the message on Brian Hartnell's car door, a message that provided more taunting than tangible leads. The letters sent by the Zodiac to newspapers, while rich with information and clues, were also double-edged swords. They provided the most direct connection to the killer, but they were also tools of misdirection. The ciphers, the boasting, and the taunts were all designed to confuse, to lead investigators down rabbit holes, and to keep the public in a state of constant anxiety. Despite extensive efforts, including FBI involvement, the codes were only partially solved, leaving many questions unanswered, and keeping the Zodiac in control of the narrative. In their quest to find the Zodiac, the police questioned hundreds of people, sifting through leads that often led to dead ends. Despite their relentless efforts, they never found the killer with concrete proof. However, among those interviewed, there were a few individuals worth mentioning, suspects whose profiles and behaviors drew particular attention. Suspect number 1, Jack Terrence. Among the many suspects in the Zodiac Killer case, Jack Terrence stands out as the one who garnered significant attention due to the compelling array of circumstantial evidence. Honorably discharged from both the U.S. Air Force and Navy, Terrence led a life marked by diverse occupations. He worked as a ham radio operator, a steel company worker, and a test foreman at General Electric, before later becoming a laundry attendant. It was not Terrence's career, however, but a tip from his stepson, Dennis Kaufman, that brought him into the Zodiac investigation's spotlight. Kaufman believed his stepfather was the infamous Zodiac Killer and went to considerable lengths to substantiate his suspicions. He handed over several pieces of evidence to the authorities, each one seemingly more damning than the last. Among the items was a hood that bore an eerie resemblance to the one described by Brian Hartnell, one of the survivors of the Lake Berryessa attack. This hood alone sparked interest, as the Zodiac was known for wearing a similar garment during the crime. In addition to the hood, Kaufman provided handwriting samples that he believed matched those in the Zodiac's letters. He also turned in undeveloped photo film reels, one of which reportedly contained gruesome images. These photographs, though never fully revealed to the public, added a chilling dimension to the case against Terrence. Perhaps the most startling piece of evidence was a knife covered in dried blood, which Kaufman claimed was used in one of the Zodiac's brutal attacks. Although the knife was turned over for analysis, the age and condition of the blood made it difficult to draw definitive conclusions. Further complicating the matter, Kaufman presented a taped phone conversation in which Terrence may have indirectly hinted at his involvement in the Zodiac murders, though the conversation was ambiguous enough to prevent it from being a smoking gun. Despite these intriguing pieces of evidence, the case against Jack Terrence was far from solid. The FBI conducted testing on some of the materials provided by Kaufman, but the results were inconclusive. Without definitive proof linking Terrence to the crimes, he remained just one of the many potential suspects in a case that has baffled investigators for decades. Terrence's profile, combined with the evidence provided by Kaufman, certainly made him a person of interest, Yet, like so many other leads in the Zodiac case, this one eventually reached a dead end, leaving the true identity of the killer shrouded in mystery. Suspect number 2, Lawrence Larry Kane. Lawrence Larry Kane is another name that frequently emerges in discussion about potential suspects in the Zodiac Killer case. Kane, who bore a resemblance to the composite sketch of the Zodiac, led a life that, on the surface, might not seem suspicious. However, his background and behavior raised enough red flags to warrant serious consideration by investigators. Kane was a U.S. Navy sailor and attended the Navy's Radio Materiel School, where he received training in enciphering and deciphering codes, skills that the Zodiac famously boasted about in his taunting letters to the press. After his military service, Kane held various white-collar jobs, but it was his darker inclinations that drew the attention of law enforcement. Known as a peeping Tom, prowler, and con artist, Kane was arrested multiple times for these and other offenses. In 1962, Kane suffered a traumatic brain injury in a car accident, which according to medical reports significantly impacted his impulse control and possibly exacerbated his predilection for deviant behavior. This injury may have played a role in his later actions, as some experts speculate that it has compromised his ability to regulate his desires. One of the most intriguing aspects of Kane's profile is his proximity to several key locations in the Zodiac case. He lived near the spot where Paul Stine, the Zodiac's last confirmed victim, was picked up on the night of his murder. Additionally, Kane resided and worked in South Lake Tahoe, the area from which Donna Lass, a suspected Zodiac victim, disappeared. Kane's connection to Lass was further strengthened by reports from her co-workers, who indicated that the two knew each other. Kane was also linked to the other potential Zodiac victims. Darlene Farron's sisters, Pam and Linda, identified Kane as the man who had been harassing Darlene before her murder. Although their testimony was not entirely consistent, as they had previously identified other individuals. Despite this, the identification added to the growing suspicion around Kane. Perhaps most compelling was the identification by one of the police officers who reportedly saw the Zodiac minutes after Paul Stine's murder. Though the officer could not be certain, he indicated that Kane bore a strong resemblance to the man he had seen. This identification, while not definitive, was another piece in the puzzle that pointed toward Kane. Kane's interest in astrology, noted by Donna Lass's friend Larry Lowe, and his egotistical personality, described by those who knew him, added to the profile of a man who could fit the Zodiac's psychological makeup. Moreover, Kane was diagnosed in 1943 with psychoneurosis hysteria, a condition that could have contributed to his erratic behavior. Despite the circumstantial evidence, Kane, like so many others, was never conclusively linked to the Zodiac killings. His name remains in the annals of the investigation, a suspect who could have been the elusive killer, but who, ultimately, left more questions than answers. Suspect number 3, Richard Gaikowski. Richard Gaikowski, a figure whose life was marked by intrigue and controversy, has often been considered a potential suspect in the Zodiac Killer case. Though never definitively linked to the crimes, the circumstantial evidence surrounding Gaikowski is compelling enough to have kept him in the spotlight of Zodiac investigations. Gaikowski served in the U.S. Army, an experience that perhaps shaped some of his later actions and interests. Following his military service, he transitioned into a career as an investigative reporter, working for a Contra Costa newspaper. His journalistic career also took him to Albany, New York, where he worked for a rival newspaper to the one that employed Darlene Farron's husband. During this time, both Gaikowski and Darlene Farron lived in Albany, a connection that some find too coincidental to ignore. Beyond his professional life, Gaikowski was known for his involvement in counterculture activities. He was a film enthusiast, a drug user, and an outspoken anti-police activist, traits that aligned with the Zodiac's apparent disdain for authority. Gaikowski's last name, which he often shortened to Gaik or Gaik, has also drawn attention. In one of the Zodiac's ciphers, the word Gaik can be seen, a detail that many believe could be a reference to Gaikowski. Another point of interest is Gaikowski's connection to the murder of Paul Stine, Zodiac's last confirmed victim. The counterculture newspaper he worked for, The Good Times, had an establishment near the scene of Stine's murder. Additionally, Gaikowski's cousin lived close to where Stein was killed. Paul Stein's sister even recognized Gaikowski as having attended her brother's funeral, despite there being no known connection between the two men. Gaikowski's mental health also plays a role in the narrative. He was diagnosed with a mental illness shortly before the Zodiac's alleged hiatus, leading some to speculate that his illness could have influenced the killer's temporary cessation of activity. When the Zodiac re-emerged, Gaikowski was operating a storefront theater in San Francisco, placing him back in the vicinity of the crimes. Perhaps the most compelling piece of evidence against Gaikowski is the identification made by Nancy Slover, the police dispatcher who spoke with the Zodiac in July of 1969. Slover identified Gaikowski's voice as being the same as the Zodiac's, a striking claim that has fueled further speculation. Despite these intriguing leads, Gaikowski was eventually dismissed as the suspect, primarily due to the reports that he was in Northern Ireland during key periods of the Zodiac's activity. This alibi has cast doubt on his involvement, though it has not entirely quelled the suspicions of those who continue to see him as a viable suspect. Suspect number 4. Arthur Leigh Allen. Arthur Leigh Allen is perhaps the most infamous suspect in the Zodiac Killer case, his name surfacing repeatedly in investigations despite a lack of conclusive evidence. Allen's life and actions provide a fascinating, albeit disturbing, profile that many have attempted to connect with the Zodiac's brutal crimes. Allen's military career ended in disgrace, as he was dishonorably discharged from the U.S. Navy. Following this, he held various jobs, including positions as an elementary school teacher, janitor, lifeguard, and sailmaker. His high intelligence was often noted by those who knew him, though it was overshadowed by the darker aspects of his personality and behavior. One of the most chilling aspects of Allen's story is his potential connection to the murder of Cherry Jo Bates in Riverside, California. Though never definitively proven, Allen was allegedly in Riverside at the time of her murder, a crime some believe could be the Zodiac's first. In a bizarre and unsettling coincidence, Allen admitted to having bloody knives in his car on the weekend of the Zodiac's infamous stabbing at Lake Berryessa. He claimed the blood came from a chicken he had killed for dinner, a story that has done little to alleviate suspicions. However, Allen did not fit the physical description provided by witnesses of the Zodiac. He was taller, larger, and balding, while the Zodiac was described as shorter, stockier, and not balding. Allen's criminal history further complicates his story. He was incarcerated for child molestation during the Zodiac's apparent hiatus from 1971 to 1974. Some have speculated that this hiatus might have started before Allen's imprisonment, casting doubt on the direct connection between his incarceration and the Zodiac's temporary disappearance. Despite the mounting suspicions, Allen was never definitively linked to the Zodiac crimes through physical evidence. His guns, fingerprints, and handwriting were all tested and found not to match those connected with the Zodiac. In 2002, DNA from a stamp on one of the Zodiac's letters was compared to Allen's DNA, and the results came back negative. Allen had previously stated that he never licked stamps because the glue made him feel sick, leaving room for speculation. One of the most compelling, yet ultimately inconclusive, pieces of evidence against Allen came from Michael Mageau, a survivor of the Zodiac's attack. In 1991, when shown a set of Zodiac suspect photos, Mageau pointed to Allen as the man who had shot him. However, this identification was later deemed inconsistent by the authorities, casting further doubt on its reliability. A curious detail in the timeline of Allen's life also raises questions. On March 13, 1971, Allen was pulled over by police for a traffic violation in San Francisco. That same day, a Zodiac letter was mailed, not from San Francisco, but from Pleasanton, California, and not to the San Francisco Chronicle, but to the Los Angeles Times. This was the first and last time a letter was mailed from these locations, and while Pleasanton is about an hour away from San Francisco, the coincidence has intrigued investigators. Despite all the suspicions surrounding Arthur Leigh Allen, the evidence against him remains circumstantial, leaving many unanswered questions. While some believe that he was indeed the Zodiac, others argue that the discrepancies and lack of concrete proof suggest otherwise. Allen's life and potential involvement in the Zodiac case continue to be a focal point of debate, as investigators and Zodiac enthusiasts alike grapple with the possibility that one of the most notorious killers in history might have slipped through the cracks of justice. As we reach the conclusion of our exploration into the Zodiac Killer case, we find ourselves surrounded by a web of tantalizing clues, chilling accounts, and a list of suspects who, despite decades of investigation, have left us with more questions than answers. The story of the Zodiac is one of the most perplexing and haunting annals of true crime, and as we've seen, each potential suspect brings with them a unique set of circumstances that could connect them to the murders, or could just as easily be the product of coincidence and misfortune. The Zodiac's taunting letters, ciphers, and gruesome acts were a sinister game to him, a game he wanted the public to watch and the authorities to fail. His ability to evade capture, despite the efforts of law enforcement and the scrutiny of the public, speaks to a figure who was either remarkably lucky, exceptionally skilled, or perhaps protected by the very chaos he created. In the end, the Zodiac Killer remains an enigma, a ghost who haunts the corridors of criminal history. The suspects we've examined each present a tantalizing possibility, yet none can be definitively placed in the Zodiac's shoes. The truth, it seems, is buried somewhere in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered by those with the persistence and insight to find it. As we close this chapter, we are left with the unsettling realization that the Zodiac may have taken his secrets to the grave, yet the search for answers continues. Perhaps one day, new evidence will emerge, a clue will be re-examined in the light of modern technology, or a long-held secret will be revealed, finally unmasking the Zodiac Killer. Until then, we are left with the stories, the theories, and the enduring mystery of a case that continues to captivate and terrify more than half a century later. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, stay